Hello, second graders. All right, time for our knowledge lesson, our read aloud, and we're going over President Lincoln and the Civil War right now, right? Yesterday, we talked about the battle at Fort Sumter, right? Fort Sumter, what was Fort Sumter again? It was kind of that military base, kind of an army base. It was off the coast of South Carolina, and it belonged to the Union, right? And President Lincoln sent supplies there, and the Confederate Army attacked. Remember, Confederates, the southern states, they attacked it, and they took over Fort Sumter, okay? It belonged to the Union originally. Okay, what two sides were fighting in the Civil War? You guys tell me. The Union and the Confederacy, right? The North and the South. Okay, who was the president at the time of the United States? Dude, look at my outfit. If you don't know this one, if I had a penny, I'd show it to you. Abraham Lincoln, right? Abraham Lincoln is the president. Okay, and why did the Confederate States want to leave? Why did they want to? Remember, the word was secede from the Union. You guys remember? Because they had slaves, and they were afraid that when President Lincoln became president that they would lose their right to own slaves, that slavery would go away. So that was kind of the cause of it, the main cause of it. All right, some stuff we're going to read about today. We're going to read about the battle begins, right? We're going to read about how it began, and, you know, we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But before we do that, we have some words here that we're going to see in our reading. And maybe we need to know those. So I'm going to move in. Hopefully you can see those. The first word up on the top is civilians. Civilians. Please read that. Chunk it out. Look at it. Civilians. Civilians are people who are not in the military. So they're people in a country who aren't in the police or in the military. Or which means, when I say military, not in the Army or the Navy, okay? They're just regular people, just like me, like your mom and dad, okay? Unless your dad's in the reserves or something, the Army reserves or Naval reserves. But civilians are just people living in a country that aren't in the military. They're not in the Army, okay? The next word at the top, clash. Clash. If somebody clashes, they disagree on stuff, okay? Is there ever a time that you might clash with your sister or brother or your cousin or even your mom and dad about something? You don't agree? Maybe one of you wants a computer first. One of you wants to watch a certain television show and you kind of argue, maybe even fight about it. So that's what clash means. Okay, the next word. Why don't you guys try and read that? devastated. Devastated. If something is devastated, it was destroyed. Devastated is another word for destroyed. Or you could be devastated that something happened, like shocked or not know what to do, caught off guard, okay? Devastated, but destroyed in this case today. Next word is going to be, you guys read it, F-L-E-E. I don't know if you've ever seen that word. You know the word free, but what would this be? Flea. And not the type of flea that lives on your dog, okay, that your dog has. That's spelled a different way, but flee means to run away, to escape. If you flee, that means you're running away or you're trying to escape. And then that last word, I know most of you have seen Star Wars. They talk about the rebels. But in this case, the rebels are the people in the Confederacy. They're rebelling against the Union, right? They don't want what's going on in the Union, so they're fighting back. They are the rebels. That is another word. You've seen Star Wars. They have the rebels, which is kind of what Luke Skywalker's in charge of, right? But in this case, the rebels is the South. They're fighting against the big power in the North, all right? So those are some words we're going to run across today. So I'm going to set up this computer over here, ladies and gentlemen, and I will start our read aloud for the day. This video won't be as long as yesterday. For some of you, I'm sorry. For some of you, all right. Okay, here's your coloring sheet. You can go ahead and color that if you'd like. And I will begin. Excuse me. I don't have coronavirus. I just have a dry cough. I kind of always have a dry cough. So that's nothing new. Here we go. We have a picture right here. Hopefully you can see that. Let me adjust that screen a little bit. A civil war is a war fought between people of the same nation. Okay, that means people, they live in the same country, they're fighting each other though. It's not one country against another. Okay. Usually in a civil war, two or more groups of citizens in a country believe in things so strongly they fight each other in order to get their way. The war that began with the Battle of Fort Sumter, which is our Civil War, that was the first battle. Remember that, the Battle of Fort Sumter, would later come to be known as the U.S. Civil War or the War Between the States, and it was an awful bloody time in American history. So not a good time in American history. There have been and continue to be civil wars in other countries right now. That just happens. Next page. Hopefully you can see that. I did what I could about the glare. All right. So after the Battle of Fort Sumter, both sides, the Union and the Confederacy, built up their armies as quickly as possible. What part of the country made up the Union? What part? The North or the South? The North. And what part of the country made up the Confederacy? The South, right? All right. Throughout the North, people wanted President Lincoln to do whatever he could to end the war quickly. And most people assumed that the war would end quickly. After all, the Union had more people, more factories, a larger army, and a powerful navy. The first true test between the armies of the North and the South came in July 1861 in the state of Virginia. Okay? Virginia is home to the city of Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy at the time of the Civil War. Today, Richmond is the capital of Virginia. Okay? Virginia also touches Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. Okay? So we have Virginia, Maryland over here. Three months after the Battle of Fort Sumter, thousands of Union and Confederate soldiers met in Virginia for the first major battle in the Civil War. When the Union soldiers fighting for the North, were the Union soldiers fighting for the North or the South? We should know that. The Union, North. All right. As President Abraham Lincoln was Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, also called the Union Army, the President of the United States is always the Commander-in-Chief of the Army. He decided to try to end the war quickly by sending his army to destroy the Confederate Army in Virginia and capture the city of Richmond. So it was decided that a large Union army would invade Virginia. The Union Army moved toward the town of Manassas. I hope I said that right. Manassas. There was a small river called Bull Run. The plan was for the Union Army to crush whatever army the Confederate tried to put in its path, and then march on and attack Richmond. Remember, Richmond was the capital city of the Confederacy. The Union Army had 35,000 soldiers, which up to that day was the single largest army ever assembled in America. The Union did not realize, however, that the Confederate Army, or the rebels, as they were also called, had roughly the same number of soldiers in the area. A large Confederate force had marched within 25 miles of Washington, D.C. They set up camp at the town of Manassas and waited to see what the Union Army would do. That July, the Virginia summer heat was so hot that it was sometimes hard to breathe. Union soldiers, many wearing heavy wool clothing, marched slowly for 2 days over rolling farmland and across shallow, muddy creeks. The Confederate soldiers waited for them at Manassas. By July 21st, it was clear that the armies were going to clash or have a big conflict or disagreement. The only question was, who was going to fire the first shot? Who do you think fired the first shot in the battle? The Union or the Confederacy? Many wealthy citizens from Washington, D.C., including members of Congress, traveled with the Union Army on its march from the Capitol. Like so many others, these civilians, there's that word, or non-soldiers, expected a quick battle, a rousing victory for the Union, and a quick end to the Confederate cause. These civilians wanted to witness the Union's victory and the Confederacy's defeat with their own eyes. So the Union civilians thought it would be over very quickly. Now, imagine what it might have been for those civilians who traveled from Washington, D.C. to Manassas to watch the battle. They had driven their carriages and packed nice picnic lunches. They brought telescopes so they could see the action. Some had even brought their wives and children to watch history in the making. Imagine a family watching the battle unfold atop a grassy hill. So think about that. The people from the Union brought picnic baskets, and they set up picnic baskets and picnic lunches so they could sit down and watch the battle. That's kind of funny. Would you have wanted to be there to watch the battle? Well, maybe not. I wouldn't want to get hit. Civilians would watch from behind a line of Union artillery or cannons. As the Confederates marched across the field, the Union guns opened fire. Were your predictions true about who would fire first? The Union. Okay. Smoke filled the air so that civilian observers could no longer see what was happening. They could not see the disaster that was unfolding right in front of them. But something they heard gave them an idea that the battle was not going to go as Lincoln and his generals had hoped. What do you think? What do you think they heard? The Confederate Army did not run away as the Union had hoped. Instead, amid the firing of cannons and rifles, a new terrifying sound emerged, the sound that would come to be known as the rebel yell. And it would haunt Union soldiers for years to come. It was a high-pitched scream, a battle cry, which the Confederates yelled out as they attacked the Union Army. Despite careful planning, almost nothing went according to the plans of the Union Army. The Confederate cannons were older and less powerful than the Union's cannons, but the Confederate soldiers firing them seemed to have more skill or ability. Several of the Confederate commanders seemed to have more skill than the Union commanders as well. One commander named General Thomas Jackson showed particular courage and intelligence. That day, General Jackson earned the nickname Stonewall Jackson because he stood like a stone wall against the Union attacks. Stonewall Jackson went on to earn a reputation as one of the most brilliant generals in the Confederate Army, although he was killed halfway through the war. This painting shows him on his horse at the Battle of Manassas. Stonewall Jackson and the rest of the Confederate Army won the first Battle of Manassas. By late afternoon, the Union Army broke apart and retreated and went back toward the city of Washington, D.C. The civilians who had come to watch the battle were shocked to realize that they were in the path of the retreating Union Army. Retreat means run away. The road back to Washington, D.C. quickly became clogged as the soldiers running in the home and on horseback ran into panicked civilians trying to flee their carriages. So they're running back. The Confederates won that first battle and the Union ran away. They tried to flee. Thousands of Union Confederate soldiers were wounded or captured in this battle. Hundreds of men on both sides died as a result of those wounds because doctors didn't have the equipment or training that they needed to have or that they have today. The landscape around the battlefield was also devastated or destroyed. So the land was destroyed with roads, bridges, entire hillsides and ruins. This image shows the destruction caused by the battle to both the people and the land. A few days before, this was lush green farmland. This was just the first of many, many battles in the years of the Civil War. In the years the Civil War took place. And the battles would be much bloodier and months and years to come. After that first battle, which was called the First Battle of Manassas or the First Battle of Bull Run, President Lincoln and others in the North realized that this Civil War would not be easy to win. The Union realized that they would need a much larger army, and more importantly, they would need to prepare for a much longer war. In fact, within a year, many people would be wondering if the Union would be able to win the war at all. Do you think the Union or the Confederacy will win the war? The Union thought it would be over quickly in one battle. I don't think so. After a year, the people in the Union then started to think they might not win at all. So when we talked about the Civil War, what is the Civil War again? It's a battle between two groups or more in the same country, okay, or in the same nation. That is the Civil War. Do you guys remember the name of the general that stood up like a stone wall? You could just call him Stonewall Jackson. Okay, he was the Confederate general that stood up like a stone wall. And remember, the North thought it would end quickly. And now we're at a point, a year passes, or a year is going to go by, and we're going to realize that it's going to take a lot longer than a year. And the people in the North actually are thinking that they might not even win the war. But who do you think won that war? Think about that, and we'll continue this tomorrow. So today there's no additional worksheet. You just had this to color. Civil War, the drums playing. One of our sheets showed that. So be ready for tomorrow to learn more about the Civil War. And take a little break right now. Maybe do some chores, help mom and dad. Make sure you're staying busy, do some exercise. And we'll do handwriting next. Bye, everybody.